In the previous video, I did front brakes, discs, and calipers. This one is about rear brakes and bleeding the system. The rear disc and caliper. Driving out pins. Or I wish. This caliper is just a clump of rust-deformed iron. Discs and calipers go to dump, so now I only care for the flare nut at the union. It would be nice to keep it intact. I will clean the union and try to undo it. The nut is not rounded as it was in front. Before I get to the union, I will get rid of this junk. To break loose the lower nut, I use this 6-point wrench. It is too tight there for the ratchet. Then I can use a ratchet wrench. If the caliper will be stuck, I will pull it together with the disc. Sweet. The caliper is out. This is a zombie caliper. No life, just rust. Let's hang this zombie. The disc. Dust shield turning to dust. Cutting lifeline for our zombie caliper. Bending the dust shield to get access to the union. Right behind the shock absorber there is a plastic gas tank, so I use this plate to contain the flame. Hey, look what I got here! Careful, it's loaded. It doesn't need much heat. It is copper nickel. It worked! Sweet! This hook for springs is handy. brake shoes, handbrake expander mechanism rusted solid. I will soak this rust overnight. A remark regarding the bolt and nut method presented in the first part. Don't use it here. We don't want to spoil the thread. In front, there was just a hole, no thread. Once again, the disc. Obviously, I will turn it down. Meantime, in the zombie department, I managed to open the caliper and one part is integrated solid with the piston. The second part? The piston came out, but it is junk anyhow. Brake pad, metal to metal. The second pad didn't have a chance to shave more of the thickness because the piston was rust welded to the caliper, cutting the shield. Cutting the handbrake cable. The cable is cut, pulling out the expander. And the bracket. To take out the old shield and put a new one, I have to pull out the shaft. The hub is nicely designed with a hole to undo those bolts. Those used to be 14s, but now I have to use 13mm socket. 24-inch breaker bar will persuade those bolts to spin. I clean it here a little bit. Don't want any debris to fall on the bearing. Tapping gently the hub. And it slides off. Old shield out. New in. Well, not really new, but it is sandblasted, epoxy primed and painted. The shield, the axle, and the brake shoe springs mounted using new bolts with thread locker. I must keep the axle in place. Therefore, I use a torque wrench set to 40 Nm. New linkage in. The rubber boot in. The bracket. Let's talk about the handbrake linkage now. This is the part that is set in the cabin at the handbrake lever, or lever. This thread is to regulate tension. We hold it here with a 17 mm wrench and turn the sleeve on the thread. This is the seal where the linkage gets into the cabin from under the car. Rubber sleeve. This loop holds the linkage to the axle. This loop is for the shorter linkage. This end goes to the left wheel. To the right. Here is the passage for the linkage. The handbrake linkage in place. And secured to the frame. The linkage goes into the middle console. And it is secured to the lever, aka lever, here. As you can see here. Turning the sleeve to the left, we loosen the linkage, lefty-loosey. As you can see, you cannot see where to attach the linkage to the axle. I had to fabricate a new holder for the linkage. Expander with the moving part upwards. Bolted into the linkage. Cleaning the hub. Assembling brake shoes. Short spring. Ceramic paste. I put brake shoes behind springs and on the expander. The longer spring goes here. Ready. The linkage on both wheels. Held to the axle. This part here goes to the cabin. The upper one goes to the right wheel. The linkage goes through the loop above the differential. The second loop at the axle to the right wheel. Washing the hub with brake cleaner. Zinc. The disc is protected with grease that I have to wash out. The disc goes on. The pin. Now I put lug nuts on using those washers because the bolts are not flush with the disc. Torque wrench. Same as the front brakes, I check the runout. This time the max is 0.05 of a millimeter. I will use this brake fluid compatible paste to lubricate threads on the brake hose in order to ease disassembly in the future. On the caliper it goes. And I put it on. Tighten it up. the union, ceramic paste on the pads. Just a bit. Old but cleaned shims. Stainless shims. Paste only when the shims touch the piston. The second, the spring and pins. One is seated flush with the caliper, the bottom one to be driven in. Knock knock. Who's there? It's me, the pin. Let me in. Ready? Not yet. I have to bleed the system. Now I will tighten the handbrake. Number 17 holds the plastic screw. Turning the sleeve to the right, we tighten the linkage. Righty-tighty. Bleeding brakes. Always use brake fluid required by your system. Mine is .4. I fill up the master cylinder reservoir up to the cap. Now I will use this do-it-yourself power bleeder. The idea behind it is to fill it up with brake fluid and push it into the system at about 15 psi pressure. But it is messy to disconnect after the job is done. You have brake fluid in the hose and the reservoir is overfilled. I prefer to push the fluid with compressed to 15 psi air and check the level after bleeding each caliper. I pump it up to 15-18 psi. No more. Otherwise the reservoir will shoot up to the air, spraying everything around with brake fluid. Pressurized, it should not lose any pressure. Otherwise the system must have a leak somewhere. Starting with rear brakes, we move to the front. In my case, rear left, rear right, and front left. One end immersed in old brake fluid, second end on the bleeder screw. Tight fit. The lion sleeps tonight, if you know what I mean. Lift up the tubing, open the screw, just to let the fluid and air out. When no air bubbles, I tighten up the screw. Check the fluid lever and move to the next caliper. The front caliper. The other side is done. This is the last one. If the pedal feels spongy, I repeat the process. This is not the end. Put the wheels on and use a torque wrench. It is important. We go with the star pattern until all nug nuts are tightened to the correct value. Now, in the last part, we have to brake in the brakes. Bring the car to about 50 km per hour or 30 miles per hour. Apply brakes gradually and bring it to about 10-15 km per hour or 6-9 miles per hour. Don't bring it to a full stop unless you absolutely have to. Repeat several times. Speed up, slow down. We are done.